The white snake I nursed for 10 years. Could have transformed whenever he wanted. He chose not to. He watched me work myself sick to feed him. He watched every man in the village reject me. Because I refused to abandon him. Then when a flood swept me away, he finally became a dragon. Only to fly past my outstretched hand and save my sister. For a decade, I had defended his useless. Villagers said no husband would accept a wife who carried a snake. Everywhere suitors offered marriage only if I abandoned him. I chased everyone away. And promised Lucian that because I had chosen him, I would remain responsible for him until death. His excuse was simple. Bella was the first person he had ever seen. When I opened my eyes in the past, and found that dying snake in my palm again, I threw him onto the rocks. This time, I would not waste my life raising someone who enjoyed watching me suffer. Bella gasped and rushed to pick him up. Moments earlier, she had pushed him into my hands, while keeping the magnificent black snake for herself. The black one's scales gleamed like obsidian. The white one could barely breathe. Bella claimed white snakes were more likely to ascend into dragons. The villagers praised her generosity and said I needed the blessing more because Bella was already beautiful. Bella reminded me of a neighbor whose white snake had once ascended and lifted an entire family into prosperity. And she sweetly asked me not to forget my elder sister when my fortune arrived. They did not know. Bella remembered our first life, too. She knew exactly which snake would transform first. When I told her to take both, her smile faltered. Healing the white snake would cost money, medicine and years of labor. She tried to refuse. Without looking selfish, she said an elder sister should never hoard two blessings. I repeated that I wanted neither snake, and promised I would ask for nothing if the white one became a dragon. The villagers cornered her with their own praise. She was truly so kind. How could she leave a dying creature behind? Then white light exploded across the clearing. The snake transformed into Lucian, a man in white robes with blood at the corner of his mouth. Even injured, looked like a god. Bella's hesitation vanished. She announced that she would take responsibility for him. Everyone mocked me for discarding a creature capable of becoming human. They warned me not to crawl back. When he ascended, Bella stood in front of Lucian, as if protecting him from me. She told the crowd she had tried to change my mind, but now she had no choice except to care for him. My refusal became another example of her virtue. I looked at Lucian. He looked back with unmistakable shock. Remembered, too. In our previous life, Lucian had let me believe he was helpless. I carried him through storms and defended him from every suitor who demanded I abandoned him. I promised that even if he never transformed, I would never leave. He accepted every sacrifice in silence. Now he had forced himself to transform at his weakest moment, just so Bella would choose him. I walked away. The entire village waited for me to regret it. Lucian became the subject of every conversation. People predicted his ascension and Bella's glorious future. I never looked at him again. One day, he seized my wrist on a deserted path. He did not speak, but his expression demanded an answer. Why didn't I love him this time? I pried his fingers loose one by one and left him standing alone. His eyes reddened as he stared at his empty hand. In our first life, he had been the center of every decision I made. Now my indifference wounded him more than any accusation could have. That night, I passed the guest room and heard one of his servants suggest taking me as a spirit pet if he felt guilty. Lucian refused. He said he had returned to correct his regrets. He said he had come back for one mortal woman and would allow nothing, not even his brother, to stop him. Then he described the woman who had saved him at Wormwood Creek and guarded him for 49 days. My step stopped. I had saved a white snake there. I had guarded him for exactly 49 days. I had never told anyone. I remembered keeping the creature warm, sharing my food and sleeping beside the creek, because moving him might kill him. Lucian remembered the rescue, but had attached Bella's face to the hands that saved him. Lucian believed Bella had done it. Even in a second life, the great dragon he had become could not recognize the person who had actually saved him. I did not correct him. I had a future to build. Instead of gathering herbs to support Lucian, I locked myself in my room and studied, while Bella basked in his attention. I read laws, histories, and policy texts until dawn. Then came the spring gala. Bella delivered an outfit for me. A hideous red floral shirt and neon green pants. When I searched for my own clothes, Every piece was gone. At the celebration, Bella appeared in celestial silk. While her friends mocked me for dressing like a clown, Bella pretended to be horrified and apologized for not preparing well enough. Her friends said I was trying to steal attention. They praised the celestial silk lotion had given Bella and claimed I was not worthy to wipe her shoes. Each insult gave Bella another opportunity to defend me. Just enough to look kind. This time, I did not walk away. I asked who had removed all my clothes and challenged everyone to inspect Bella's room. Her face turned pale. I reached for the door. Pain pierced my wrist. 2 fang marks appeared on my skin, and my mouth began speaking words I had never intended to say. I insulted Bella, called her ugly, and claimed I had dressed that way to steal attention. The crowd attacked me, so someone slapped me. Others pulled my hair and tore my clothes. The poison made every attempt to explain sound like another jealous outburst. I saw Bella crying into her hands, while a smile flickered behind her fingers. Whatever Lucian had used on me had turned the truth into proof against me. Before I escaped, I saw a flash of white near my wrist. Lucian appeared beside Bella and pulled her into his arms. She hid a smile against his chest, while he stared at me with cold accusation. Later, he came to my room carrying medicine. I knocked it away. He forced an antidote into my mouth and waited until the poison cleared. "Do you have nothing to say to me?" he asked. He knew I remembered our first life. He still wanted me to explain why I had stopped worshipping him. No. My reputation became worthless. The village called me jealous, ugly and ungrateful. I disappeared. Long enough for everyone to assume shame had driven me away. In reality, I left to sit for the examination newly open to women, while Bella and Lucian believed I was hiding. I wrote the policy essay that would determine the rest of my life. When I returned, Bella greeted me in front of Lucian. She said I needed to accept that he loved her and stop coveting what was not mine. I pushed past her. She immediately collapsed into Lucian's arms, shielded her and accused me of hurting her, while pretending not to care. He told me I could not force love, and announced that he had chosen Bella. Then drums sounded outside. Officials in red robes entered our home carrying an imperial scroll. The entire courtyard fell silent. "Congratulations to Miss Raven," the leading official proclaimed. "First place in the provincial examination. Her policy essay has been read by the emperor himself." Bella stared at me. Lucian's arms slow. We dropped from around her shoulders. The official unrolled the golden decree and announced that I had been summoned to the capital. He handed me a heavy bag of gold for the journey and said the court would cover every expense. "With my score," he added, "I might bypass the preliminary appointments entirely." The same villagers who had laughed at me began to kneel. Bella reached toward my sleeve. I stepped aside. The official rebuked her for touching the emperor's chosen top scholar without permission and ordered her to kneel with everyone else. I walked past Lucian to receive the scroll. Only then did he understand that I had not returned to fight for him. I had returned to leave them all behind. The imperial carriage did not smell of marsh grass, rot, or wet serpent scales. It smelled of dried cedar, cold ink, and sovereign authority. When the lead envoy, Minister Shen, barked the order for the village to clear the thoroughfare, the red-tiled wagon rolled forward with a heavy, deliberate rumble. Through the carved lattice of the window, Raven did not look back at the kneeling crowd. She did not look at Bella, whose forehead was pressed against the dirt, forced down by the flat of a royal guard's halberd, nor did she look at Lucian, who remained standing alone in the center of the courtyard, his white robes billowing like a funeral shroud. He had not knelt. Even in the guise of a mortal man, the haughtiness of a river god clung to his spine. But his posture was stiff, his jaw locked so tight. The muscle twitched under his porcelain skin. Let him stand, Raven thought, adjusting the stiff horsehair collar of her scholar's robe. Let him stand until the rain rots his soles. The bag of imperial silver rested beside her knees, its weight solid and earthly. In her first life, every copper coin she earned had gone into earthen jars to buy ground deer antler, wild ginseng, and spirit-soothing lotus seeds for a dying white snake that refused to heal. She had eaten pickled turnip rinds and boiled barley for 10 winters so that the serpent curled against her ribcage could feast on marrow broth. Now, her fingers turned the pages of the imperial canon. Miss Raven, Minister Shin murmured from across the small tea table, his voice pitched with the deferential caution reserved for those who had caught the sun of heaven's direct eye. Your treatise on the southern waterways, it startled the Grand Secretariat. Most scholars write of building grander altars, sacrificing white oxen to appease the dragon kings when the summer floods crest. You wrote of sluice gates, retaining dikes, and the dredging of the silt basin. The dragon kings demand tribute whether the crops drown or thrive, Raven replied, not looking up from her text. Wood and stone do not ask for blood, yet they hold back the tide if carved with precision. Shen let out a dry, appreciative chuckle. A dangerous philosophy. The temples will despise you. The temples do not pay taxes to His Majesty. They only collect them. Behind them, 3 leagues to the south, the village of Green Willow faded into the morning mist. In the courtyard of the broken-down cottage, the silence left behind by the imperial escort was suffocating. Bella rose slowly, dusting the damp earth from her knees, her eyes burning with an ugly, frantic light. She turned to Lucian, forcing her voice into the breathy, fragile register she had perfected. Lucian, my sister is merely proud. You must not take her arrogance to heart. In the end, what is an imperial title compared to a dragon's favor? When you ascend, a single breath from you will buy 1,000 cities. Lucian did not answer. He was staring at the tracks left by the carriage wheels in the soft mud. His chest felt hollow, like an unstoppered vessel in an icy wind. In his memories of the first life, the fragments that had haunted his spirit during his long hibernation beneath the celestial vault, a woman had wept over him when he was tossed into the brambles. A woman had scrubbed his scales with winter well water, her hands raw and chapped, singing lullabies through split lips. That woman had sworn that even if he remained a crawling thing in the grass forever, she would never cast him aside. Bella was that woman, he told himself savagely. It was Bella who wore the scent of wormwood. It was Bella who found me at the creek. Lucian? Bella reached out, her fingers timidly touching his silk sleeve. A sudden, irrational jolt of repulsion tore through his meridian channels. He jerked his arm away before he could check the impulse. Bella gasped, taking a half-step back, hurt flashing across her features. Have I done something wrong? Lucian looked at her, his golden-slit pupils narrowing. Where is the medicine? The medicine? The 7-herb mash, he said, his voice dropping into a low, rumbling timbre that vibrated in the damp air. The roots of the iron stem reed, ground with winter marrow and sweet root. The brew that soothes the burning in my core. My transformation was forced, the poison from the rocks has entered my lung. Meridian. I need the brew. Bella swallowed hard, the blood draining from her lips. In their previous life, she had never paid attention to what Raven boiled over the clay stove every night. She had only smelled the bitter, foul-smelling smoke that seeped through the floorboards and complained that it ruined the scent of her jasmine powders. She had assumed it was cheap weeds picked from the ditches. I will prepare it immediately, Bella stammered, offering a trembling, devoted smile. I know every herb by heart. Just rest, my lord. She hurried toward the small kitchen shed. Lucian watched her retreating back, his hands slowly rising to press against his chest. Beneath his ribs, his spiritual core, the nascent dragon pearl, pulsed erratically. It was cold. It had been cold ever since he forced his human shape to step between Bella and the village crowd. Why does her scent feel unfamiliar? He thought, confusion gnawing at the edges of his divine pride. The hands that held me for 49 days smelled of crushed marsh mint and bitter bark. Why does she smell of cheap musk? He shook his head, brushing the doubt aside with the arrogance inherent to his bloodline. It mattered nothing. He was a prince of the white dragon lineage of the western seas. He had deigned to grant his salvation to a mortal girl. Whether she smelled of mint or musk, she would serve as his anchor in the mortal realm until his horns broke through the cloud ceiling. As for Raven, his jaw tightened again. She is merely throwing a tantrum. She remembers the first life. She is bitter that I chose the sister who showed me kindness first. Let her go to the capital. Let her see how small human glory was when set against the eternal majesty of the heavens. When she realized that no amount of gold embroidery could keep her warm when the river rose, she would come back. She had always crawled back before. The Ministry of Work sat in the grey shadow of the northern gate, a sprawling labyrinth of drafty halls, towering archive towers, and courtyards filled with discarded stone samples and scale models of water wheels. To the highborn sons who bought their minor posts with family silver, it was a purgatory of dust and tedious accounting. To Raven, it was a fortress. Within 3 months of her arrival in the capital, the senior clerks had stopped speaking to her as if she were an anomaly to be indulged until the novelty wore off. They spoke to her with nervous, hurried deference, carrying stacks of tax ledgers and riverbed surveys directly to her desk in the Western Archive. Miss Raven, pardon, Junior Scribe Raven, an elderly clerk with ink-stained spectacles whispered, laying down a map of the Huai River Basin. The Ministry of Rights is pushing the Board of Revenue again. The summer rains are 3 weeks away, and the imperial astrologer claims the White River deity is agitated. They want 60,000 taels of silver to cast 32 bronze bells to sink into the river mouth to placate him. Raven did not lift her eyes from the cross-section diagram she was drawing. Her brush movements were terrifyingly steady, each stroke of black ink laying out the reinforcement buttresses for the southern dikes. Tell the Board of Revenue that if they cast 60,000 taels of silver into the mud, the silt will simply rise another 3 inches at the mouth, causing the flood to breach the eastern bank 40 hours sooner. The Minister of Rights says neglecting the divine sacrifices will bring the wrath of the heavens, the clerk murmured nervously. Then let the Minister of Rights stand on the embankment and explain that to the 300,000 peasants who will drown when the mud wall gives out. Raven said flatly, finally setting her brush across the porcelain mountain rest. She looked at the clerk, her dark eyes clear, devoid of fear or reverent delusion. Man builds the canal. Man digs the ditch. The river follows the low ground because it is water, not because it possesses a holy soul. Bring me the labor distribution records for the provincial garrisons. If the soldiers are not fighting northern nomads this spring, they will swing spades. The clerk bowed low, his spine bending almost double. At once, Scribe Raven. As the man scuttled away, Raven leaned back in her hard elmwood chair, rubbing the side of her palm. Her right wrist, where Lucian's phantom fangs had struck her at the spring gala months ago, was entirely healed. No scar remained. The imperial doctors she had consulted with her own stipend had given her sulfur and silver leaf paste, purging the last trace of the spirit viper poison from her veins. She had felt no sadness when the poison finally washed out of her system in a bout of black sweat. Only a deep, clean lightness. You speak of river gods as if they were unruly oxen, a deep, amused voice sounded from the doorway. Raven's gaze snapped to the entrance. A tall man stood leaning against the lacquered doorframe, cloaked in a mantle of dark, unadorned wool that seemed to absorb the dim lantern light. His hair was bound by a simple ring of hammered iron, and his face, sharp-boned, pale, and carrying a thin, pale scar across the left brow, bore the distinctive, chilling stillness of someone who had walked out of the deep abyss and never quite returned to the warmth of the sun. His eyes were not golden like Lucian's. They were the color of black river stone submerged in deep water. Raven did not flinch. An ox pulls a plow when you feed it grain and break its neck to the yoke. A river god takes your daughters, takes your harvest, and drowns your house anyway. An ox is far more respectable. The man stepped into the archive, the faint scent of rain, damp slate, and ozone trailing behind him. You have a sharp tongue, Scholar Raven, he said, stepping toward the table where her maps lay unrolled. His dark gaze drifted across her ink lines, lingering on the mathematically precise floodgates she had plotted along the central Huai corridor. Most mortals would not dare speak of dragons with such insolence, especially a mortal woman who once carried one in her sleeve. Raven's pulse did not quicken. She met his black eyes with unwavering neutrality. You are the Obsidian Prince, she said, stating it not as a question, but as a verified ledger entry. The serpent Bella chose on the mountain slope. A thin, dark smile touched the man's lips. His name is Selim. But you may call me what I am, the one who did not pretend to be a helpless worm to be suckled on human tears. Bella abandoned you the moment she realized Lucian was a white dragon of the Western Court, Raven remarked coldly. She threw me into the thorny scrub behind the pigpen, Selim corrected. Smoothly, his voice devoid of anger, sounding merely clinical. She believed. Black scales belonged to water adders, common beasts with no divine destiny. She did not know that the black dragons of the northern abyssal trenches shed their outer skin when they reach maturity, while the western white lineage requires constant mortal nourishment to sustain their fragile, decorative hides. He reached out a hand, his long, pale fingers hovering an inch above her map, tracing the line of the river where the southern garrison was stationed. She wanted a god who looked like a prince in white silks, Selim murmured. Instead, she took a parasite who will bleed her dry. That is her affair, Raven said, pulling the map slightly toward herself. I have no interest in the domestic arrangements of Green Willow Village. It will become your affair, Selim replied, his dark eyes fixing upon hers with piercing clarity. Lucian's spiritual core was damaged when he forced his human form to save face. He cannot heal without dragon-nourishing spirit blood. Bella cannot give it to him, she does not have the constitution of an earth-tending woman who has spent a decade gathering wild medicine in the frost. She is poisoning him with the wrong drafts. When his dragon marrow begins to rot, he will look for the river to cleanse himself. The Huai River. The Huai River is under my jurisdiction, the black dragon said simply. And I have no intention of letting a crippled white lizard poison my waters to save his own hide. Raven looked at the dragon who had been discarded on the rocks, then back at her. Engineering schematics. Then we have a shared objective, Prince Selim, she said, dipping her brush back into the dark well of ink. You keep your waters clear. I will keep my dike standing. And if the white dragon falls from the sky, we will make sure he hits the stone. In Green Willow Village, the harvest had failed. It had not failed because of flood or drought, but because the fields had not been weeded, the irrigation furrows had fallen into disrepair, and the family's savings had been entirely spent. Bella stood in the damp, drafty kitchen of their ancestral house, her hands red and blistering from the heat of the iron pot. The air was thick with the stench of scorched roots and sulfur. Drink it, she pleaded, carrying the steaming wooden bowl into the guest room, where Lucian lay across the daybed. Lucian's appearance had changed drastically over the past 4 months. The divine, untouchable glow that had surrounded him on the day of his human transformation was dull and fractured. His pale hair had lost its pearlescent sheen, looking like unwashed flax, and beneath his translucent skin, thin blue veins pulsed with a sickening, sluggish rhythm. He took the bowl with trembling fingers, bringing it to his lips. He took one sip and immediately spat it across the floorboards. The scalding broth hissed against the wood, eating a small, dark ring into the grain. This is not sweet root, Lucian gasped, clutching his throat, his golden eyes bloodshot and wide with fury. This is ditch stock. It contains iron chalk. It calcifies my spiritual veins. It was all I could buy. Bella shrieked, her voice cracking with the hysteria she had been holding back for weeks. She fell to her knees beside the bed, tearing at her hair. The apothecary in town refused to give me more wild ginseng on credit. They demanded 40 taels for the mountain lotus. I have sold my mother's silver hairpins, I have mortgaged the 3 acres behind the mill. And the butcher refuses to give me calf marrow without copper in advance. Lucian stared at her, his breathing ragged. Why? Why did you not gather it? From the mountain slopes? In the past, you always gathered it from the high crags before dawn. Bella's throat tightened as if an invisible noose were pulling taut. In the past? She screamed internally. In the first life, Raven spent every night hanging off cliffs with a rope tied around her waist. Raven slept in wet caves to dig the frost ginseng before the sun melted its sap. I never touched a spade in my life. The spirits of the mountain are hostile to me now, Bella lied desperately, tears streaming down her pale, powdered face. Because I chose to serve you, the local earth gods have cursed my steps. Lucian, my lord, you are a dragon. Can you not simply conjure gold from the stream? Can you not call down the celestial rain to turn the pebbles into jade? Lucian's fingers dug into the wooden rim of the bed so hard the timber splintered. A dragon does not conjure mortal trash, he snarled, though the truth was far more humiliating. In his weakened state, he could barely summon a cup of clean water without his core seizing in agony. You swore you were the one who guarded me at Wormwood Creek. You swore you knew the rhythm of my soul. I did. I do. Bella wept, throwing her arms around his waist, burying her face into his chest. I love you more than life itself. It is Raven, it is all Raven's fault. She took the family silver when she went to the capital. She told the villagers lies about us before she left. If she had stayed, she could have worked the fields while I tended to you. The name Raven struck Lucian's ears like a sudden blow from an iron bell. Raven. Whenever he had been sick in the old life, the hands that touched him had never trembled with hysteria. They had been steady, calm, smelling of crushed wood and pine sap. When the fever took him, those hands had wiped the blood from his jaws. Without a single word of complaint, sitting beside him on the cold stone through the longest, darkest nights of the winter solstice. He remembered waking once, his serpent body coiled in an earthen dish, watching a girl's silhouette against the paper window. She had been sewing coarse boots. By the light of a single tallow candle, her back bent, coughing blood into her sleeve because she had sold her own winter coat to buy him medicine. Bella's hands are soft, he realized with a sudden, suffocating clarity. They have no scars from brambles. They have no calluses from the mortar. Pack our belongings, Lucian said coldly, his voice flat, devoid of the divine warmth he had once projected. Bella looked up, her eyes wide with hope. We are going to your celestial palace? We are going to the capital, Lucian said, his golden eyes fixing on the northern horizon through the cracked window. The Grand Secretariat has summoned all provincial scholars for the midsummer banquet. Raven will be there. Bella's heart leaped. Yes. Let her go to the capital. Raven was merely an official's pet, an ink grinder for old men. Lucian was a dragon. Once the high nobility in the capital saw a true Western dragon, they would shower him with riches, and Raven would be forced to bow before them in the dust of the palace square. Yes, my lord. Bella cried, wiping her tears, a triumphant sneer already returning to her lips. Let us show my sister what she threw away. The imperial palace of the Vermilion Bird gleamed beneath the oppressive heat of the 5th lunar month. Lanterns of red-oiled paper hung from the eaves of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, casting a warm, blood-orange glow across the 300 civil and military officials gathered for the solstice feast. At the lower table sat the provincial magistrates and newly minted scholars. At the upper dais, close to the emperor's carved dragon throne, sat the grand secretaries and the ministers of state. Raven sat at the right hand of the Minister of Works. She wore the 5th-rank scarlet official robes, embroidered with the silver pheasant across her chest. Her long hair was pulled up into a tight, pristine top knot secured by an unadorned silver hairpin granted directly from the emperor's hand for her work on the Huai River embankments. Her posture was straight as an unsheathed sword, her brush moving rhythmically across a small slate tablet as she recorded the flood warnings arriving from the Southern Post. Writers. The girl does not even drink the imperial wine, an old censor whispered to his neighbor, shaking his head. She treats the solstice banquet like a board meeting in a siege. Let her be, Minister Shin murmured back with deep respect. The South is drowning. If her sluice gates do not hold next week, half the empire's grain tribute will rot in the silt. She is the only one who knows the height of the water by the hour. A sudden commotion at the outer gate of the courtyard shattered the ceremonial music. The guards at the marble stairs shouted warnings, their halberds clattering as they crossed their shafts. A wave of murmuring swept through the assembled nobility. Through the gate walked a man and a woman. Lucian had used the last reserves of his spiritual energy to weave an illusion of divine splendor. His robes were woven from white silk that caught the lantern light like dragon scales, and around his brow hovered a faint, shimmering halo of pale mist. Bella walked beside him, draped in sky-blue satin that dragged along the stone, her chin lifted high, her eyes darting across the gathered aristocrats with naked hunger. Who dares breach the imperial feast without a royal summons? The captain of the guard bellowed, drawing his broadsword. Lucian did not stop. He flicked his wide sleeve, and a gust of mountain wind swept through the courtyard, blowing out 50 lanterns in a single breath and knocking the guard's spears aside with the force of an iron gale. I am Lucian of the Western Cloud Sea, his voice boomed, deep and resonant, vibrating in the chests of the mortal ministers like rolling thunder. I have Come to grace the mortal court with the presence of heaven. Several old scholars gasped, dropping their jade cups. A dragon. A true river. Immortal. Bella smiled, a radiant, triumphant thing that pulled at the corners of her mouth. She looked directly at the upper tables, her eyes scanning the crimson robes until she found Raven. Look at me, Bella's eyes screamed across the marble courtyard. Look at the god. Who chose me? You may have your scraps of paper and your red cloth, but I walk with the masters of the sky. Raven did not drop her brush. She did not even look up from her slate until she had finished writing the estimated cubic volume of the Huai River's northern overflow channel. Only then did she lay the chalk down, look across the courtyard, and meet Lucian's burning golden eyes. Lucian's gaze locked onto her. He had expected to see shame, longing, or at least the bitter jealousy that had consumed her in their past life. Instead, Raven looked at him the way a master builder looks at a cracked load-bearing beam, with cold, calculating assessment, determining precisely when and where it would break so the debris could be cleared away. Miss Raven, Lucian said, stepping forward until he stood at the base of the marble terrace, his voice dropping from its booming divine register into something sharp, intimate, and demanding. You left the village without my leave. You abandoned your duty to your family and your betters to play at mortal politics. The entire hall fell dead silent. The emperor, seated behind the yellow silk screen above, did not move, watching with cold curiosity. Raven stood up. Her red robes rustled softly against the stone as she stepped down the 3 marble stairs, stopping 10 paces away from him. This is the imperial court of the Great Ming, Raven said, her voice clear, carrying effortlessly through the quiet hall without the aid of spiritual tricks. Every person here holds a seat by virtue of service, lineage, or examination. By what authority do you step upon these tiles, beast? The word beast fell like a severed head onto the flagstones. Bella shrieked. How dare you? Raven, have you lost your mind? He is an ascending dragon. He saved you from the river in the past life. You should be on your knees begging for his blessing. An ascending dragon? A dark, mocking laugh echoed from the shadowy corner of the terrace. Prince Selim stepped into the lantern light, dressed in the dark purple robes of an imperial grand envoy of the northern marches. His black eyes gleamed with razor-sharp malice. An ascending dragon whose scales are peeling from dry rot, Selim said, stepping down to stand beside Raven. A western prince who cannot even conjure enough spiritual fire to hide the stench of stagnant mud beneath his silk. Lucian's golden eyes widened with violent shock as he recognized the man standing beside Raven. You, the Black Adder from the ditch? The Black Adder who took the northern abyssal seal 300 years ago. Selim corrected smoothly, letting a sliver of his true divine aura bleed into the air. The temperature in the courtyard plummeted instantly. The air grew heavy with the smell of ocean depths and crushing ice. Lucian's faint white halo flickered, sputtered, and vanished like a candle in a typhoon. Lucian coughed violently, a spray of dark, corrupted blood splattering against his pristine white robes. Lucian! Bella cried, rushing to hold him, but the moment her hands touched his shoulders, Lucian shoved her away with enough force to send her sprawling across the marble. Shut up! Lucian hissed, his vision swimming with red and black spots. He looked at Raven, his voice cracking with desperate, furious confusion. Why are you standing with him? In the first life, you swore you would stay by my side until the world ended. You gave me your youth. You gave me your blood. I gave those things to a dying creature that I believed had a soul, Raven replied, her voice dropping into a register so chillingly quiet that only Lucian and Bella could hear. I did not give them to a vanity-drunk parasite who watched me starve so he could feel superior. I did not know. Lucian choked out, his spiritual core seizing in a violent spasm of agony. I was blind. The celestial seal blocked my memories of your face. I only remembered the 49 days at Wormwood Creek. I thought it was Bella. She wore the ribbon. She carried the basket. A silence like an open grave fell between them. Raven looked at Bella, who was scrambling backward on the stone, her eyes wide with terror. The ribbon, Raven murmured softly, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, cold, pitying, and absolute. The red silk ribbon you stole from my wooden chest on The morning of the 50th day, Bella. Bella's breath caught in her throat. She could not speak. The ribbon that was soaked in my blood, Raven continued, turning her eyes back. To Lucian. Because on the 48th night, you were freezing to death in the mountain frost. I did not have wood for a fire. I slit my own palm and fed you. The warm blood from my veins, binding the wound with that red ribbon. Lucian froze. His entire body turned to stone. Slit her palm. Fed me the blood from her veins. Memory, sharp and jagged as broken jade, tore through the fog of his divine soul. He saw the dark creek bank. He saw the freezing rain. He felt the warm, metallic life force pouring between his cold serpent jaws, bringing his dying heart back to life beat by agonizing beat. And then he remembered opening his golden eyes in the dark, looking up through the rain. The hands holding him had 3 deep, distinctive scars across the right wrist, the marks left by a mountain viper that had bitten the girl while she was gathering herbs to save him. Lucian's gaze slowly, horrifically dropped to Bella's hands. Bella's hands were smooth, pale, and completely unmarked. He turned his head slowly, his breath rattling in his throat like broken glass, to look at Raven's right wrist. There, beneath the wide cuff of her red official robes, the 3 faint, silver scars were clearly visible against her sun-browned skin. No. Lucian whispered, the sound torn from the deepest, most corrupted chamber of his spirit. No, 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 no. You spent 2 lifetimes looking for a savior, Raven said, her voice entirely devoid of anger, possessing only the terrifying weight of an imperial decree. And you could not even recognize the blood that bought your life. Before Lucian could scream, the sky above the capital broke open. It was not a gentle summer rain. It was a deluge, a black, roaring wall of water that descended from the heavens with the force of an avalanche. A drenched post rider burst through the courtyard gates, his horse collapsing beneath him in the mud, throwing him across the flagstones. Report, the rider screamed through the thunder. The Huai River has breached the southern basin. The mountain runoff has merged with the western tributary. The great dike at Dragon Head Shoal is fracturing. 3 million people in the lowlands, they will be under 20 feet of water by sunrise. The courtyard erupted into absolute panic. Ministers scrambled for their carriages, princes screamed for their bodyguards. The emperor rose from behind the screen, his voice cutting through the tempest. Raven. Raven stepped forward immediately, her scarlet robes whipping violently in the gale. Your Majesty. Take the imperial token, the emperor commanded, his face set like iron. Take the northern garrisons. If the dike cannot be saved, cut the western spillway and divert the water into the barren salt flats. Save the people. Clear the river. By your decree, Raven answered, taking the heavy bronze tiger tally from the eunuch's trembling hands. She turned on her heel, striding toward the palace gates without a single backward glance at the 2 figures kneeling in the pouring rain. Raven. Lucian's voice broke into a desperate, wretched howl. He lunged forward, throwing his pride, his godhood, and his celestial lineage into the mud, crawling across the drenched flagstones to grasp the hem of her scarlet robe. Raven, please. I will fix it. I will command the clouds. I will hold back the river for you. I will be your dragon, only yours. Look at me. Raven, look at me. Raven did not stop. She did not pull her robe away in disgust. She simply kept walking forward, and the heavy imperial silk pulled cleanly from his trembling, blood-stained fingers, trailing through the mud and rising above the water. You could not even save yourself from a drying puddle, Lucian, Raven said over the howling wind, her voice fading into the roar of the storm. How dare you pretend you can save an empire? Selim stepped past the weeping white dragon, his heavy iron boots splashing muddy water across Lucian's face. Stay out of my river, lizard, the black dragon murmured with chilling indifference. Or I will drown you in the silt. At Dragon Head Shoal, the world was a nightmare of brown water, roaring timber, and screaming men. The Huai River had swollen into a thrashing leviathan of mud and uprooted pines, pounding relentlessly against the massive stone and earth dike. Tens of thousands of peasants and soldiers were laboring in the dark, hauling wicker baskets filled with heavy stones to plug the yawning fissures opening along the embankment wall. Raven stood on the highest promontory of the watchtower, her scarlet robes drenched, the rain plastering her hair to her temples. Her eyes were fixed on the mathematical markings painted on the stone water gauge. The water is rising 2 inches every quarter hour, an engineer shouted over the deafening roar of the cataract. The foundation stones are sliding. Scholar. Raven, we must retreat to the high hills. The dike is going to burst. No, Raven commanded, her voice cutting through the thunder with the force of an iron wedge. Open the 7th sluice gate. Release the western locks. If we open the western locks, the salt marshes will be ruined for 5 years. The provincial governor wept. A field can be desalted in 5 years, Raven snapped, her dark eyes flashing in the lightning. A drowned man cannot be resurrected in 1,000. Open the gates. Now. The massive iron winches groaned as 50 soldiers threw their weight against the chains. The colossal timber gates began to rise inch by inch, and the roaring river surged into the diversion channel, relieving the immense pressure against the main wall. Suddenly, the sky tore open with a blinding flash of silver light. A massive white dragon, its scales dull and spotted with black rot, descended through the storm clouds. Its roar was not majestic, it was a screech of agony and desperate madness. Lucian had cast aside his human shell entirely, burning the very marrow of his life force to take his true celestial form. I must save the dike, his mind screamed through the blinding pain of his collapsing core. If I save the dike, she will look at me. If I calm the waters, she will remember the 10 years. She will take me back into her sleeve. He plummeted toward the raging river, his massive coils wrapping around the collapsing center of the stone dike, using his own body to block the breach. Look, the soldiers cried in terror. A dragon. A white dragon has thrown itself against the wall. The massive weight of his serpentine body held back the crushing wave for a single, fleeting second. Lucian turned his massive, horned head toward the watchtower, his golden eyes searching through the rain until he found Raven standing at the edge of the parapet. See? His eyes begged through the torrential downpour. See what I am doing for you? I am bleeding for you. I am dying for you. Raven looked down at the dragon pinning itself against the stone. She did not smile. She did not weep. She simply raised her hand, signaling the soldiers at the western winches. Do not stop, she ordered, her voice cold as winter ice. He cannot hold the pressure. The dragon's body is merely a temporary obstruction. Drop the heavy iron caissons behind him. Seal the stone. Lucian heard the command. The realization hit him harder than the 1,000,000 tons of roaring river water smashing into his ribs. She was not waiting for him to save the day. She was using him as ballast. To her, his divine, eternal body was nothing more than another wicker basket of stones, another chunk of timber dropped into the mud to buy her engineers 10 more minutes to drop the iron gates. Raven, he roared, a sound of total, shattering despair that shook the foundations of the hills. The river surged. A massive wall of black water, carrying 3-ton granite boulders from the upper mountains, slammed directly into his chest. His rotting dragon pearl shattered inside his heart with the sound of snapping crystal. With a final, horrific screech, his white scales were ripped from his flesh by the violent current. His massive body was torn from the dike and swept down the raging diversion channel, tumbling helplessly into the dark, churning waters of the salt marsh, buried beneath millions of tons of mud and silt. The river did not stop. But the iron caissons dropped with a thunderous crack, sealing the breach forever. The dike held. 3 days later, the sun broke through the gray clouds over the Huai River basin. The floodwaters were receding peacefully through the network of diversion canals, draining harmlessly into the northern sea. The fields were muddy, but the villages were standing. 3 million people walked out of their homes onto dry land, their voices rising in a ragged, overwhelming roar of thanksgiving that echoed across the valley. In the shallow, stagnant mudflats 10 leagues downstream, Bella crawled through the reeds. Her sky-blue silk gown was torn to shreds, covered in foul-smelling slime and human waste. Her face was scratched by brambles, her fingernails broken to the quick as she dug through the mud. Lucian. She croaked, her voice dry and hoarse. Lucian, where are your scales? Where is your gold? She found him lying in a shallow drainage ditch beneath an uprooted willow tree. He was no longer a towering celestial dragon. He was not even the handsome Prince in white silk. He had shrunk back into a pathetic, 3-foot-long serpent, his white scales turned the color of dirty ash, missing large patches of skin where the river rocks had flayed him raw. His right horn was snapped off at the stump, and his golden slit pupils were cloudy, blind, and milky with rot. He could barely move. His tiny jaw hung open, gasping weakly in the dry mud, covered in flies. No! Bella shrieked, falling backward into the slime, her face twisted in absolute disgust and horror. No! You are a dragon. You were supposed to give me eternal life. You were supposed to make me an imperial princess. You are just a worm. A useless, disgusting worm. The little blind snake weakly turned its head toward the sound of her voice, letting out a faint, dry hiss of sorrow. It had chosen her. It had thrown away 10 years of pure, devoted mortal blood for a woman who now kicked muddy water into its blind face with her bare foot. Get away from me! Bella screamed, scrambling to her feet and running toward the distant road, sobbing in terror and ruined greed. She did not get far. A squad of imperial bailiffs, carrying the arrest warrant signed by the Grand Secretariat for the crime of defrauding the imperial court and treasonous disruption of the solstice feast, stepped out of the reeds. The heavy iron chains fell across her neck with a cold, merciless clatter. Bella of Greenwillow, the lead bailiff announced, his voice devoid of pity. By imperial decree, for the crime of fabricating divine lineage and disturbing the Emperor's feast, you are stripped of your civilian status and sentenced to 30 years of hard labor in the southern salt mines. Bella screamed, thrashing against the iron collar, but the soldiers dragged her away through the mud like a slaughtered sow. 100 paces away, on the newly constructed stone levee, Raven stood looking down at the quiet water. The breeze from the sea caught the sleeves of her scarlet official robes, lifting the heavy silk like the wings of an ascending crane. Beside her, Prince Selim leaned against the stone balustrade, tossing a small black river pebble into the current. The Western Dragon Court sent an emissary this morning, Selim remarked casually, his dark eyes watching the ripples spread across the water. They apologized for Lucian's disruption. They stripped him of his princely name and removed him from the celestial registry. To them, a dragon who loses his pearl to a mortal woman's trickery is worse than dead. Raven did not look down at the drainage ditch where the broken white snake lay, dying in the mud. He was dead the moment he believed he was above the earth that fed him, she said softly. Selim turned his head, studying the clean, sharp profile of the woman beside him. The Emperor has named you Grand Minister of Waterways. You have the authority to command every dam, every canal, and every dike between the northern sea and the southern mountains. You will have to deal with many more dragons. Scholar Raven. Raven turned to face the vast, open horizon, where the great river met the endless ocean under the clear blue sky. Her hands, bearing the faint silver scars of a past she had completely conquered, rested firmly upon the cold, solid stone of the embankment wall. Let them come, Raven said, her voice steady, tranquil, and sovereign as the rising tide. If they bring the rain, they will be given their channels. If they cross the wall, they will be broken on the stone. She turned her back on the river, stepping onto the paved stone road that led straight to the heart of the capital, never once looking down into the mud again.